Hello, good morning, everyone. This is Kenneth from Carbon+Alt+Delete. We are starting the webinar in about 1 or 2 minutes. We still have people joining. In the meantime, feel free to put in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. All right, I propose we get started. Javi, can I ask you, when people are still arriving and they're stuck in the lobby, that you let them in? So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on efficient data collection for carbon accounting. Very happy to see that so many of you are interested in this topic, although I'm afraid that means that most of you are also struggling, at least to a certain extent, when it comes to data collection for carbon accounting. Disclaimer, there is no magic solution that we can offer you to suddenly get all the data perfectly and on time when doing carbon footprinting. But in this webinar, we will try to share our learnings, give you some tips and tricks, and also show how we as Carbon+Alt+Delete, as a software provider, might be able to help you with that. So as a quick introduction, who is in front of you today? So for those who don't know me yet, I'm Kenneth. I'm one of the co-founders of Carbon+Alt+Delete. I'm overseeing our go-to-market approach. So I like to talk a lot to our existing users from the platform or potential new users. And I'm joined today by Javi, one of my colleagues. Javi, feel free to quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Javier. I'm originally from Spain, but based here in Belgium. I see some familiar names in the audience, so some of you, I'm sure, we've seen each other before. I am an engineer by training, but I have a customer-facing role in Carbon+Alt+Delete. So also looking forward to the topic of today because I see it recurring in many meetings. So that's it, I think.
Thank you, Javi. Maybe before we get started, some housekeeping rules. So it's a webinar, it's a rather big audience. So by default, you're always muted, and by default, your camera is switched off. So you're free to follow this webinar in your pajamas. That's all fine. Although we like to have some interaction, and the chat is the way to do that. So we do have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to put in questions in the chat. Javi and I will keep an eye on it as we go. And you can also vote for questions from other people in the audience by liking the question. So if there are a lot of questions, we'll try to give priority to the ones with a lot of thumbs up. So please share your questions in the chat as we go. So what is the agenda for today? Maybe first thing is step back. For those who don't know us yet or don't know exactly what we do, we as Carbon+Alt+Delete, we are a carbon accounting software provider. So we build software to calculate the carbon footprint of companies, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. And I think what makes us a bit special is that we work exclusively with sustainability consultants, because what we see is that companies, they don't need directly us as a software provider, but they need consultants to educate them, to help them calculating their carbon footprinting, to give them peace of mind, to fill in the data gaps, to guide the process, to explain what it means. And we are the software provider in the back to make things more efficient and things less prone to error or more standardized. So that means that over the last couple of years, we've been working with more than 50 sustainability consultants across Europe, almost in every European country. And we have learned that basically all of you are to some extent struggling with collecting activity data from your clients to properly calculate a carbon footprint. So that's why we host this webinar, to share our learnings, to capture your feedback in the chat. Feel free to also share your learnings or where you disagree with us. As said, there is not a magical solution to it, but hopefully you walk away with some additional ideas or pointers from this webinar. So that being said, we've structured it in 4 topics. The first one is on the question how to collect data, which is more a process question. The second question is how to input data, which is more a technical, almost software related question or tooling related question. The third aspect is how we as Carbon+Alt+Delete might be able to help you. And then as said, towards the end, there is a Q&A, but don't wait until then to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to pick them up if relevant. So to set the stage very clearly, today we're really talking about collecting activity data. We are not talking about finding the right emission factors. And as you all know, combining these 2 data points gives you the carbon footprint. We do get also a lot of questions from our consultancy users on emission factors, emission factor databases. So we hosted a previous webinar on that. So if you missed that one, you're still interested, feel free to drop us a quick note. Or if you go to our website, you can find the link to the previous webinar on emission factors. But today we are talking about collecting activity data for your carbon footprinting. That is an introduction, and now I would like to basically put you a bit to work. So please go to this link, menti.com, use the code, and then you will see the question popping up: which struggles do you face when you're collecting activity data of your clients, of the companies that you're supporting with the carbon footprint? So if you go to the Menti link, you see that you have three free fields to answer it. So well, I see already some answers coming in, so that's good. It means that it works. So I give you a bit of time to provide answers, and then normally what I will be able to do is to show you a nice word cloud of the words that come back most often. So I'll give you still a couple of seconds to answer. I'll give you the joy of following live what's going on there. A lot of different words, but I think what is coming back is data quality remains rather central, data availability. Ooh, you almost get seasick when you start looking at it. But I think accuracy, data quality, data availability, incompleteness, completeness, things that are rather central to the word cloud. Looking a bit more towards the outside, a lot of different names. I see lack of transparency, communication, incomplete data, talking to many departments. All right. Scope 3 is there as well. Good. No big surprises so far. All of those things we have heard before. Accuracy, data quality, and availability. Very good to hear that they're so central, because these are things that we try to help our consultants with as well. So how to collect data. So common data struggles that we see, and I think a lot of the things that we've put on this slide basically came back in the word cloud. We like to distinguish between issues that we see on the process side, so really to collect data, and issues that we see on the quality side. So what is the quality of the data? On the collection process side, data not centrally available, it's all over the place. If it's available, it's not always available in an easy to process format. So it's in some kind of an email or PDF or even a scanned document, which is the worst. Long lead time, slow responses, people are going on holiday, you need to wait, and then the other person is going on holiday. Several iterations, and I think what we're all afraid of is last minute changes, where suddenly you need to do an update and then all the numbers change and you need to redo the report because all the numbers has changed as well there, right? That's really a time sink. On terms of data quality, often the data is not yet available or only proxy data is available. For instance, spend-based emission factors or the procurement of goods, but only in number of units or volume, not so much in mass. While for proper activity-based carbon footprinting, you often have the emission factors in kilograms or tons. The source of the data is not always clear. Completeness of data is not always clear. So how are you sure that you are not forgetting something? I think that's personally for me almost the most hard one, right? Because this is really like, it's about the unknown unknowns. How can you be 100% sure that you have all the data? Consistency of the data. In particular, if you get data on, for instance, employee commuting from different departments, how are you sure that they are consistent in how they're classified, etc.? And data terminology. Every company has some internal lingo, which you as a consultant need to understand and then translate to the proper carbon footprint meaning. So for instance, the fuels they use, the vehicles they use, and so on. Some tips and tricks to overcome those struggles. And this is rather maybe a theoretical slide, but I'll try to make it as concrete as possible. But it's based on working with those more than 50 consultancies, what we've learned on making your life easier in terms of driving this data collection process. And we like to group it in 4 different steps along the process of collecting data. First of all is making it clear what data is needed. So organizing a data kickoff is something that I hope a lot of you do. But I think an important thing there is also to really have the key internal stakeholder at the company in that meeting to really create a sense of urgency. That it's really clear, like, look, we need to do this as a company, calculating our carbon footprint for reason A, B, or C, which is really an important reason. So there is a need or a sense of urgency. Second, what really helps a lot is providing people with data templates, data owners. Data owners are typically people from finance, HR, operations, fleet that really provide the data. Providing them with templates help them to understand what really is needed. When it comes to data extraction always lies with the data owner. They need to go to their systems, get the data. What personally I like a lot is that you ask for off-the-shelf available data, in particular in the first reporting year, really to avoid that if some data is not available, that people spend a lot of time to gather this additional data. Let's take the example of employee commuting. Let's say you don't know exactly which transport modes employees are using. So what you could do then is almost starting a survey amongst all your users to ask them how they come to work, which is quite a big chunk of work with a long lead time on itself. And maybe then at the end of the carbon footprint calculation, it turns out that employee commuting is only 2% of the carbon footprint, and you will not actively work on it during the first couple of years. So then you've spent quite a bit of time to basically have zero impact. So I always like to start with off-the-shelf available data. And really a management kind of trick is to proactively schedule follow-up calls, put calls in their agenda so that people feel like they have an internal, informal deadline, but somewhat formal because there is really a meeting already in the agendas. When it comes to data review, how are you sure that the data that you receive is correct, makes sense? Check for outliers. Really, some very quick and dirty back on the envelope calculations are often already very helpful, right? If they say they have 100 FTEs, and then you get a number of how many kilometers people commute, you can quickly calculate per day per FTE. Does it make sense? Is it somewhere in the range from 5 to 20 kilometers? If it's 1, it's probably wrong. If it's 100, it's also probably wrong. Right? 6, be clear on what you as a consultant do and what the data owner does in terms of data cleaning. Just workload management, that the same job is not done twice. Data calculation, so once you've received the data, input data, activity data, calculating the corresponding carbon emissions, processing it in the right greenhouse gas protocol activities. And what we see successful, and it's also what we have implemented in our software, is to really have kind of a Chinese wall between people that provide the data and people that do the calculation. We've seen too many mistakes when people who know the activity data very well, because they are the fleet manager, they are the HR manager, they are the finance manager, they are the procurement manager, but they basically have no experience with carbon footprinting. So if they need to really do the calculation themselves or be involved in that, things go wrong, right? Things that should be in scope 3 move to scope 1, or typically the other way around. The emission factor is not picked right. There is confusion about what the well-to-tank piece is, and so on and so on. So we like to have the data provider being involved in step 1 to 3, but the data calculation really being with the consultant. Point A, make sure that you always know, if you calculate the carbon emission data point, where the data came from, so that you always can go back. And the final 2 pieces of advice is proper status management. So where are we in data collection? Who provides which data when, and what is the status? So that's number 9. And 10, use some way of data versioning system. There are a lot of existing systems out there. You can work together on SharePoints, on Dropbox. You can set it up internally, shared drives, shared files, and so on. But the worst time wasted is really having a discussion on, is this really the latest version? Or no, I've sent you an update. It should be different. You know, these type of discussions, it's really kind of a waste of time. So these are our 10 tips and tricks that you can take with you. A final reflection to conclude our learnings is that we see clearly 2 different, we call them school of thought when it comes to data collection. One is what we call consultancy-led, where really the consultant is in the lead. The consultant takes the lead in identifying the data need. Like, this is the data that I need. Data extraction always lies with the data owner, because a consultant typically cannot access the data sources, cannot access the HR system, the procurement system, and so on. But the data review, the data calculation, and the process management really lies with the consultant. The alternative is the data owner-led, where the consultant always needs to tell what data is required, but then in the rest of the process, the data owner takes the leads, sometimes even up to the calculation and or the process management. So as a consultant, of course, the benefit of the purple model is that it's less work. The advantage of the yellow-orange model is that you are more in control, less prone to error, but more work. And in particular, step 3 is for me crucial, right? Again, let's even take the example of mobile combustion company cars. If you typically, at least in Belgium, a lot of companies have company cars. They all have some system with fuel cards where they track how many fuel or diesel, petrol has been fueled by those cars. They can extract this data from their fleet management system. And then there is some data review needed. Typical questions like, it's labeled here petrol B3, but in the UK government emission factors, I only have an emission factor for petrol, which is then 100% mineral, for diesel, 100% mineral or average blend. Which one should I pick, right? These type of questions. Or is it really complete, or do we have some other management cars which are not on the same extract of fuel cards? So all those type of questions pop up in step 3, and then is it the consultant who will answer them, or is it the data owner who will answer them? And we had another discussion yesterday with someone, and a consultancy supporting companies in the UK with carbon footprinting. They basically made this part of their commercial proposal where they said, look, if we do your carbon footprint, there are 2 ways of doing it. Either you as a client take the lead, which is a cheaper option, but more work for you, more responsibility for you, or we take care of the data collection, which is more work, so more expensive, but you don't have to worry about it. So sometimes you can even put this question or this option towards your clients. So that about collecting the data input. As said in the beginning as a disclaimer, no magic solution. Everyone is struggling with it. Depends really a lot on the type of client, your own policy as a consultancy. Sometimes also depends on the type of activity, right? For stationary combustion, you might work with a data owner-led approach, but for goods and services with a consultancy-led approach. So it's really a mess. Everything is struggling a bit with it, but at least I hope that some of the points we have set here or the structure that we've laid out can help you to think about how to improve this process. Then the second question is on how to input the data. So once you receive data in whatever format, how to process it quickly from activity data to carbon emission data. So typically you receive data from some data source, which is internal into in the company, and you want to transfer it into a greenhouse gas inventory in a tool like ours, or even in your own Excel spreadsheet carbon footprinting tool. So there are 5 ways of doing that, starting really from a manual input, right? So a person receives some data over email in a PDF, even in another Excel file, and he or she copy-paste, types it over in the tool. Still happening quite a lot today. Second is Excel. So you receive data in an Excel format. Typically, it's bulk data then, right? It could be even hundreds, thousands of lines on flights, on cars, fuel consumption, on procurement of goods, and so on. And you're going to process this data into a greenhouse gas inventory by copy-pasting it or uploading it and mapping it. You see, we start from not really advanced to more advanced. So a more advanced version is document screening, where you receive a lot of information in documents, ideally PDFs, and automatically you're going to capture the right information from PDFs. So this is, for instance, document screening, something that happens a lot in financial reporting, where financial invoices in PDFs are screened and automatically the value, the buyer and the seller's information are captured automatically, right? So this happens a lot in financial reporting. Again, a bit more advanced is file transfer, which is kind of an automated version of step 2. So what is file transfer? It's kind of a script that automatically once every week, once every month, takes a download from, let's say, the HR system, puts it on a shared drive, and then gives a signal to the other party, the greenhouse gas inventory, to automatically go there, pick up the new file and process it. So what the person needs to do manually here in the Excel happens more towards automatically in this file transfer. API is then, let's say, the Rolls-Royce, where everything happens automated. So automatically going to export data from the data source and import it in the greenhouse gas inventory. What is the main difference between a file transfer and an API? An API is way more standardized. It's kind of an agreement between the one providing the data and the one accepting the data. Like, look, if I send you this data, it will be in this format and it will exactly mean this. So for instance, let's take even the example of electricity data. I will send you electricity data. It will always be in the unit megawatt hour, and it can either be on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. And that's the structure. And we don't touch the structure. If internally the data source change, all fine, but the person providing the API still say, hey, I always stick to that system. Energy data will always be in megawatt hour, daily, weekly, monthly. So that allows the one receiving the data to build on it and basically never have to look at it again. In file transfer, in Excel's document screening, things can change, layout change, template change. There is an update in the structure. And that means that both the data source and the accepting piece need to change their way of processing data. I see a question of Victor on can we use OCR in Carbon+Alt+Delete? No, not yet. And that brings us basically to the next slide. So you have those 5 types of collecting data. Which one is the best one depends basically on 2 aspects. One is data quality, the second one is data size. So data quality consists of completeness of data and the data format. And with data format, I mean, is it basically machine readable or not, right? A handwritten note, yes, it's machine readable with AI, but it's way less machine readable than a JSON file sent through an API, right? Completeness is about basically how complete is the data, right? If you're talking about electricity consumption of a company, is it covering the full company? Is it covering all the different years and relevant time periods and so on? On data size, again, 2 dimensions. One is volume, the second one is frequency. So let's say, again, the example of electricity. If you have a company with 2 electricity meters, the volume is low, 2 data points. If you have a company with 100 electricity meters, because they have 100 different shops, the volume is higher. The frequency is how often do you need the data? Do you need to know the electricity data every day, every week, every month, every quarter, every year? Right. So depending on those 2 axes, we can map the different ways. Manual import is for rather limited data size and across all data qualities. Excel import is for higher data sizes, so more data points. If the data quality is low, it can even be to large data sizes. If the data quality is higher, document screening becomes relevant in this part. But then the information needs to be available in documents in a structured way so that they can be screened. File transfer, it's really at the bottom right here. So for if you really need to process a lot of data, but the data quality is not great, the structure is not very clear, it's not 100% mature yet. And then API, I said, is a bit the Rolls-Royce, that's really relevant. If the data quality is high, so if it's really possible to say, look, the data is complete and I provide it in this structure and that structure is so complete that it will never change. And data size is also very high. So you need data basically almost hourly, weekly, daily, or it's about a lot of data points. So if we apply that to carbon footprinting, today we really see that we are in the bottom left of this paragraph. So today we see that a lot of data, it's poor data quality, is not 100% complete. You always need to fill in data gaps. It comes in Excel files, in emails, not always in a machine readable format. And also very important, the data size is still very limited. Companies are reporting only annually on their carbon footprint and typically on a rather aggregated level, right? So that's also why we as Carbon+Alt+Delete today focus a lot on manual import, but that's, I think, a no-brainer, but also a lot on Excel imports and having a good Excel parser, and that's what Javi will show in a minute. We hope, but that's more like, what will the future bring? But we hope, we expect that we will move towards a world where API and document screening are more important. And personally, I'm a big fan or a big believer, I would say, of document screening. So I personally believe, but this is really my personal opinion, it's worth what it's worth, that, again, very similar to how financial reporting works, that we move to a world where companies, when they send each other invoices, they put a validated carbon footprint, embedded carbon emissions from the delivered product and services on their invoices. And that would mean that we as a software provider can start doing document screening using OCR technology to very quickly extract those information from these documents. APIs will also be possible. By the way, today, technically, we have an API. However, we see very little use cases for it yet. The only use cases that we have is that we have some consultancies that have an energy management system in which they already have a lot of energy data, electricity, natural gas of their clients. And then we extract this data through an API so that in Carbon+Alt+Delete, you can start calculating also the scope 3 emissions of those companies. But that's not really a use case, right, where the data is available in high quality, so all the energy data in a machine readable format, and it's about a lot of companies, very granular data, so high data size. I saw some questions coming in, and I saw one question indeed on the OCR from Victor. So I think I answered that. Maybe one more fun fact, quote unquote. Actually, in the early days of Carbon+Delete, we did quite a bit of experimenting with OCR technology to see what we could already do. And we had a lot of invoices from utilities, from fuel card providers, even from flights. And now we trained OCR software tools to see, can we extract information on the documents? One, what is the invoice about? Is it about electricity, so scope 2? Is it about flight, so business travel? Or is it about gas consumption, so stationary combustion? And second, can we then extract the relevant information, typically the primary activity data, kilowatt hours consumed, kilometers flown, liters fueled. And the result was it was not a scalable approach because it was just a too unstructured problem to fix with OCR, right? So therefore, I think there is a need for more structured documents where basically on the invoice itself, suppliers put an embedded carbon footprint, which is then hopefully also validated. That being said, I propose, Javi, if you take over, I can still share the screen when we're on the slides, but then you can jump to your screen when you want to show the software, if that's okay. And then I'll have a look at the questions for the Q&A.
All right. I think, can people see my screen or still the slides?
They still see my screen.
Okay. Now then?
Yes, that's all good.
All right, so I'm gonna quickly show what we offer or propose for the data collection part, not really a full demo of the product. If you would like that, just feel free to say something in the chat. for the data collection part. So basically, I think, as Kenneth said, sometimes it's the consultant doing all the heavy work, and sometimes you guys can involve your customers because they're often also active in the calculation process, or at least in the data collection process. You can definitely invite customers inside the tool. If you're only the consultant, then you can just simply import data here. Today, I will focus on another interesting widget inside Carbon+Alt+Delete, maybe less known. That is that you can ask someone, so a data owner, to send you the necessary data for a specific activity inside Carbon+Alt+Delete. So the way that we do it is with the request widget. Maybe, yeah, here it is. So basically, you can create a new line, right, to request electricity or whatever activity category, whatever data you need, electricity. Here, you can define a few parameters. First, and probably most important, which activity do you need? Who's the email? I'm going to use my name here. You can also edit your email. So basically, the email that is going to automatically be sent to the data owner, you can configure it in the way you want. And then basically what they will receive is something like this. So they get to a data request page where they can use our template. So we offer standard templates for all the activities in the greenhouse gas protocol. If they click on here, they will download automatically the template for this specific activity category. Once they do that and they fill in the data, they can drag and drop here a file. Here it is. And they can upload it. Now, this will not automatically import the data inside the system, but what it will do is it will show here as awaiting import, as you have in this case, for instance. So then what you can do when you import the data, right? I'll go back here and refresh quickly. Voila, here it is. When you import the data, you select here the sheet, right, inside that Excel file. You can also define a range if you have a more specific amount of data you want to import. Then you can simply import everything inside your emissions inventory. So here you go. So this way you can basically give access to someone that might not be experienced enough to use the software, right? But they own the data. Then they can send you the data that you need to import inside the system. And you can do all that without having to give accesses and make it too complicated. So this is the way it works. When you go to the inventory, what you also have is that the Excel will be automatically attached in the line, which is also sometimes important. It's not locally stored, but you have it accessible here at any time. And maybe also interesting when you're using the import. So in this case, when you're the consultant, right? Sometimes you guys receive Excels that are not so clean. In that case, we made a kind of advanced import functionality that can basically read Excels that are not so structured. So in that case, when you're importing, for instance, a pivot table that you pull to clean some data points, what you can do, you go here, you define your range in the correct sheet. Now what you need to do is basically help the system understand that, for instance, here the description is not in English, and some of these fields, so this is the unit of measure, but of course it should be columns, right? So this is the consumption, this is the contract type, this will change depending on the activity category, these are nodes. You're missing some information, so you can quickly fill it in here. This value match, the system remembers consistently which country you work in. So basically, I did my last demo in Italy. I saw in the Excel unit of measure was megawatt hours, and now my Excel is proper. I can attach the file as well if I want, and I can simply upload it. So this is also a quick fix for when receiving not clean or proper data that you need to import in your inventory of emissions. Okay, voila. it's imported. This, if you do with our templates, of course, it works even faster. But this is an alternative as well that maybe it's interesting to see for you guys. So I think for the demo, maybe I can leave it here. I saw some things popping up, and then we can jump into a Q&A that I'm sure some people will want to ask or say something.
Yeah, maybe one more thing here, Javi, also to make that very clear. If you now click on Go to Inventory,
yeah,
and you open a line, just one line. Yeah, it doesn't really matter which one. You see the paperclip icon, right? So I basically want to make 2 points. One, when it comes to data versioning, tracking back where the data come from, you see indeed where the mouse is, the original Excel file is attached in the inventory. So you can always go back to the data you started from. And we also keep a log of who edits the data when. So for instance, you see here, this was apparently done during a demo 22 days ago by me and Javi, because we're in his account. So that's how we try to build the data trail. Second, I think what you've seen here, and that's really an important principle, is that we have this Chinese wall between the data provider and the consultant. So of course now Javi has shown both sides, but the data provider is not accessing the platform. He cannot see all the data. He cannot change the data. It's really the consultant receiving the raw activity data and doing the necessary processing to make sure it's, from a greenhouse gas point of view, correctly processed. Is it okay if I take over the screen again, Javi, before going to the Q&A?
Yes.
Maybe one more slide to wrap it up, but let me share my screen again. Good. So to summarize and also be transparent on where we help and also where we don't see really our role. So again, the 5 same steps from data need, data extraction, review, calculation, to process management. The size of our icon or logo indicates how important we can be on that. So on data need, we want to make your life easier, but basically giving an automated overview of the data that is required. That is the data request page, and provide you with standard templates that you can share with your clients so that they already know what type of data is available and so on. The data extraction, as said there, the bulk of the work always lies with the data owner. Technically, we have the API connection to automatically extract the data, but I think, as I've said before, today we see rather limited use cases for that. So maybe I should even make the Carbon+Alt+Delete logo even smaller here. When it comes to data review, there I think we clearly see a role. So as Javi showed, when you upload data, we highlight, hey, this data is missing, or this data we cannot recognize, right? So they call the country, or the country was forgotten, or they name the country Belgique, and we don't know it because we only know Belgium, for instance. And here I think we also have further ideas to automatically map outliers, very high, very small values. Data calculation, I think that's really the core of what we do. So once the activity data is there, finding the right emission factor, storing the original data source. So that's really the core of what we do. That's part our carbon accounting engine is also validated to be in line with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the ISO standard. Status management. On process management, I think 2 things. Yes, we see a role in status management. So you saw in the data request page, there was kind of an overview of what is the status. Is it draft? Is it pending? When it comes to file management, and I think there was also one of the questions like versioning system, I think there we learned that we can go only that far, right? So in Carbon+Alt+Delete, so this is basically a print screen of the page that Javi showed, right? In Carbon+Alt+Delete, you can keep an overview of all the files that people sent you in here. And when people send an update, you can replace this file and so on. So yes, technically you can do some versioning system. However, we learned that there are so many file sharing, co-working solutions out there that people already know, that people are familiar with. Could be in the Microsoft environment, could be in the Google environment, could be still something else, that we see less an added value from us there, right? So I think that's more depending on which, it really depends on, are you on Microsoft or Google, basically, right? Whether you move towards the Google Drive environment or the SharePoint environment. But I think that's probably the best way to set up a versioning system directly between you and your clients. I think that brings us to the Q&A. So we're kind of perfectly on time. That's very good. I saw that one of our other colleagues, Felix, who's also in the call, took the freedom to already answer some of the questions. Thanks a lot for that, Felix. I've noted down some that got quite some votes, so let me try to address them. Javi, if you can have another look at the questions, you can pick up one that I forgot. I think there was a lot of interaction between you, basically, on is it good to overestimate data if you're not sure? And there was some exchange. I think a lot of interesting things had there been said. So maybe two things to add there. So let's say that you don't have perfect activity data. For instance, you only know the electricity consumption. You don't know whether it's a green or a gray electricity contract. So for your market-based emission factor, which assumption do you take? Then yes, it's probably safer to take a conservative estimate and assume it's gray unless proven otherwise. Two aspects on our side. We have a policy of zero baseline recalculation. So we try to keep the inventory always up to date, which means when emission factors change retroactively, we push through that update so that in terms of emission factors, you're always working with the latest. So for instance, recently we did an update in AR to make sure you work with the latest global warming potentials, and we calculated that back also for historical carbon footprints. And the same goes for activity data, right? So we facilitate basically retroactive updates of activity data. That's in line with our policy. Second point, we are working on what we call a data quality or an uncertainty module, where we give an indication on the quality of the emission factor. So typically a spend-based emission factor has a higher uncertainty than a scope 1 more physical-based emission factor. And you as user will also be able to give the similar indication for the activity data. Is it precise? Is it proxy data? Or is it a rough estimate? And then we will be able to, on an aggregated level, calculate the statistic accuracy or deviation on the numbers that you have. And that might lead to exactly, I think, as was discussed in the chat, basically a carbon footprint going, even maybe going up, but the accuracy of the carbon footprint year on year becoming better, right? Which I think might sometimes be a painful message for companies, but is from a climate perspective a good thing. A second point I noted down was on data storage, but I think that was answered by Felix. So we host in the European Union, falling under European GDPR legislation. One was on data availability, and again a question from Vico. Now that the European Union is driving machine-readable reporting, would it work to scrape data automatically from company reports to get emission intensities per companies? Then combine that with invoice data. Yes and no. So I think absolutely. So there is a point about data availability and data quality. I think we're living in a world where very rapidly more and more data becomes available, and also more and more in a machine-readable format. So more and more companies are publishing sustainability reports, which you can scrape. Under the CSRD, companies will need to report even in a machine-readable format, the XBRL format. So that's all good. However, today, and I think it will still take 2-3 years at least, the data quality cannot be guaranteed. And for me, the benchmark in particular when it comes to scope 3 is always do a rough estimate on the activity data, take a detailed emission factor from eco-event, and that's the baseline. So any data that needs to come from a supplier needs to be more accurate than that and more backed up by that, right? So again, other example, if a company sources plastic granulates, their supplier gives them kind of a PDF, which is not audited, stating that the emission factor per kilogram of this plastic granulate is, I don't know, X ton or X kilogram CO2. Then I would still rather work with an eco-event emission factor, and typically the activity data, the company know themselves how many ton they actually really procured of that material. Only when the supplier can really provide you with audited data or validated data, or at least data that passes your expert judgment, then I think it's a step forward compared to the baseline where you rely on databases like eco-event, for instance. I don't know, in the meantime, have you any other question that popped up that gets quite a bit of votes that you want to address?
I was actually having a look at the latest ones. I see now Felix is also answering someone.
It was a bit off topic to like the central question of the webinar, so we shouldn't discuss it.
I see somebody asking for a demonstration of the templates. We can share the templates. They're of course tailored for the inputting into the system. Maybe that's worth it to have a look more in detail.
Yeah, and we can even do that. So we do have public support pages, right? And on those public support pages, we also make the import templates available. So I can even put this in the chat. And those import templates are basically Excel versions from our data model that we have in the inventory. We are, as we speak, discussing with our users how we can further improve them, because that's, I think, another important disclaimer. When it comes to data collection, we are also continuously learning from people using our software and the struggles that they have, right? So I think everything that we have said is really, we're in a moving world when it comes to data quality, data collection. So those templates, feel free to have a look at them and know that they're not set in stone. We're improving them as we move forward.
Kenneth, I have one more question here that I think is quite reasonable to discuss in remaining time. Generally, do you find that data collection and input in Carbon+Delete is more owner-driven or more consultant-driven with your existing users?
Very good question. And we see basically everything. Depending on which activity are we talking about? Again, scope 1 is typically more data owner-driven, scope 3 typically more consultancy-driven. 2, the type of client and the maturity of the client. To put it very bluntly, if your counterpart is really a dedicated sustainability manager with a technical background, he or she can take up a data provider role. If you're working for a company without a dedicated sustainability manager or no one with really a pure technical background, I think there's more room for the consultancy to take the lead also in the data collection. And the third aspect is often just the vision that you have as a consultancy, right? Do you want to be as cheap as possible? Then you need to shift the workload towards your client. Do you want to be as accurate as possible? Then you need to take over as much as control as possible, because the chance that you make a mistake is way lower than that a data provider makes a mistake. I know that's not a very precise answer, but that's what we see. We as Carbon+Delete, we want to facilitate both flows, right? And for instance, when it comes to the templates, we see that sometimes the templates are shared directly with data owners so that they can fill it in directly. And the question that we get sometimes then is to also, oops, sorry for jumping between all the slides, but the question that we get around the template is to make them even better, that they cannot only help in data need, data extraction, but also almost in data review. The templates are also sometimes used just internally by consultants, where consultants get raw data. They then process them into our templates, use that template to have a final discussion with their clients. And when they fully agree on the data completeness in the template, they upload it. Right? And so we see that the templates are used in both approaches, but sometimes in a slightly different way. There's one more question I want to touch upon, which is something on the SECA report.
Yes, Kenneth, if you allow me, yes, I was about to give that ball to you. I know you have answered that. I just wanted to answer one more question and want to say one more general remark. So someone asks here, like, if we have users that do fully automated data collection, and I think I want to answer to that, like, if what you're aiming for here is like fully automated data collection, basically like there's no human almost like touching the data between data input and like the final carbon footprint. We just don't believe in that. We believe that there always will be some human intervention and human checks, and we see a very central role for the expert, right? Like the consultant or the expert to do data analysis and do final checks. And we actually don't believe that the world ever will be in that position, that doesn't happen anymore. That is somewhere in the grains of our software development. And then on the other questions, there are a few other questions that are really good. We just haven't been picked them because the answer is like not very straightforward, or it's hard to do like verbally right now without prep. Maybe we'll come back to it in another webinar or something like that. So if your question hasn't been answered, it's not that it wasn't a good one. It didn't seem fit for the Q&A section. And the last one, if you want to answer that, that one question on the SCCR, Kenneth.
Yes. So it's more a question on reporting, right? So what comes out of Carbon+Alt+Delete is we have our standard reports in line with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol requirements, one in line with the ISO 14064-1 requirements. We also recently are working with some UK clients to provide them with a SECA report, right? So because basically all the data you need for a SECA report is in Carbon+Alt+Delete. So we do have functionality to build this more quote-unquote custom reports, which can be different depending on the country or even depending on the consultancy, right? So that's something we can facilitate with. Maybe to wrap it up, also in the interest of time, so what we will do is we will share the presentation, we will share the recordings, we will also go once more through all the questions in the chat, and if some of them were not addressed, we will share a remaining Q&A document addressing them, or if we can't address them, point you to people or sources who can address them. That being said, if you want more info, feel free to visit our website. I've shared a link to our support pages. If you go to our website, you can also book a call to have a more detailed demo of the platform. Maybe, Javi, if you can put the link to our demo scheduling in the chat as well, that would be very good. And that being said, I think the only thing that I still can do is thank you for your presence and your active participation in the chat. Always great to see that like-minded people are sharing ideas and learnings. That's great. Thanks a lot. We'll follow up with the material as discussed, and then enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks a lot.